There is an established tradition of villains taking on the names of fantastical monsters in order to appear more fearsome and intimidating, although the results can vary wildly. Of those colorful villains, few are as truly monstrous as the multi-level supervillain that calls itself Cerberus, who I can't wait to tell you more about on this episode of Lesser Evils. The entity known as Cerberus first appeared in Superman Man of Steel number 13, but its story begins a year earlier in Superman Man of Steel number 1 from 1991, having nothing to do with the real monster that exists in the DC universe. This Cerberus is a terrorist organization that has a big problem with LexCorp. In Metropolis, Cerberus has the citizens fearing the organization's next attack after they firebombed a store and warehouse involved with LexCorp. Superman would do what he could to reassure the population of the city, but even his super senses couldn't discern what Cerberus's next move would be. The Man of Steel wouldn't have to wait long, as without warning, every plane in the skies over Metropolis suddenly loses power. The disaster is averted as Superman gets to work and ensures that every plane ends up landing safely. Superman has little time to wonder if Cerberus was responsible when the cargo wing of the airport explodes. Left behind in the smoke of the explosion is a message stating, "You know who we are, you know what we want. Capitulate to our demands or worse will follow. Cerberus." Acting as Clark Kent, Superman begins doing research on the attack and draws a connection between LexCorp and the small country of Tatamelia. While taking a look at a LexCorp building, Superman's super hearing picks up a sub-audible signal that leads him to an industrial park on the outskirts of Metropolis. Superman wastes no time with doors or warrants and smashes down a wall heading directly towards a seemingly normal tool chest, but reveals a hidden bomb emitting the signal that the hero was hearing. With only seconds to spare, Superman hurls the bomb out of the building, where it violently explodes outside away from the civilians. Just as with the previous attack on the airport, Cerberus leaves a threatening message in the sky for all to see. Tracking down the source of the explosive signal, Superman discovers a man in power armor seemingly waiting for him. Believing this person to be Cerberus, Superman gives chase as the armored figure takes flight. The man isn't nearly fast enough, and when Superman catches up, the armored figure reveals he is not Cerberus, but just one of the heads of the dog who guards Hell's Gate. After pulling off some of the pieces of the villain's armor, Superman is shocked to discover that the Cerberus agent is actually a cyborg. Before Superman can take the defeated villain away to question, a beam of energy from a separate, uninvolved villain strikes the cyborg, reducing the man to atoms. A short time later, Cerberus sends another pair of cyborgs, known as Rourke and Belcher, to attack a LexCorp factory. Rourke uses his robotic arm to slice through the door, allowing Belcher to vomit some kind of corrosive energy, leaving the facility to burn to the ground. The next day, the pair use a remote-controlled Apache helicopter to attack the LexCorp-owned News Time building. Superman arrives to find the helicopter firing rockets full of napalm. When Superman grabs the helicopter, he is surprised to find that it has no pilot, just before the helicopter explodes directly in his face and leaves behind another fiery message from Cerberus. After saving the employees working in the building, Superman speaks with the arriving LexCorp representatives who deny knowing what Cerberus wants from them. In the cyborg's hideout, Rourke reveals that LexCorp has folded to Cerberus's demands, meaning they have no need to launch their next attack. Belcher doesn't take this well and decides to launch the missiles they were preparing anyway. Napalm-filled rockets begin firing from the roof of their hideout and spread out to rain destruction on Metropolis. Despite Superman's efforts to catch the rockets, one of them ends up striking a bridge full of cars. Before the cyborgs can launch a second set of missiles, the pair are interrupted by a boy who is looking for his runaway cat. Before Belcher can murder this untimely witness, the boy screams at the top of his lungs for Superman's help. An instant later, Superman bursts through the wall, and the boy announces that the cyborgs are working for Cerberus. After receiving a stomach acid bath from Belcher and getting a taste of the clamp from Rourke, Superman reminds the villains that he's frickin' Superman before he thoroughly disarms the grabby villain. Superman then begins to interrogate Rourke until the cyborg unexpectedly shuts down. Turning to Belcher, Superman finds the situation repeating itself as the cyborg mysteriously shuts down before he can talk. While Superman is left confused by Cerberus's goals, the group turns its attention to the foreign nation of Tatamelia, whose government had reluctantly been working with LexCorp. Cerberus had been extorting more money than the Tatamelian government could afford, and when they stopped paying, the terrorist organization sends an army of helicopters to firebomb the local farms. The Cerberus helicopters find unexpected resistance from the arriving feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl, who had unwittingly been summoned by a group of Tatamelian revolutionaries. Quetzalcoatl makes quick work of the helicopters, and by the time Superman hears of the attack and arrives to stop it, he discovers that the job has already been taken care of, and he now has to fight a pissed off flying serpent god. Fuck, I love comics. Back in Metropolis, Cerberus has created two new cyborgs called Jolt and Blockhouse. After they finish practicing with their new powers, the pair are called to meet with their boss. As the pair pass through Cerberus' headquarters, they walk past walls lined with heads kept in jars. When they arrive, Cerberus explains how Superman has messed with their plans enough to become a target, and orders the two cyborgs to kidnap Lois Lane, because everybody knows how Superman works. Sometime later, Jolt and Blockhouse wait in the rain while watching Lois Lane go about her errands. Despite Blockhouse almost screwing up their plan, the pair of cyborgs wait patiently for their moment to strike. Eventually, the cyborgs have their trap prepared for Superman and alert their boss, who intends to use Lane to destroy the Man of Steel. The cyborgs know they cannot kidnap Lane with Superman being nearby, so they resort to creating a distraction by toppling over Metropolis' giant Christmas tree. During the brief seconds it takes for Superman to take care of the tree, the cyborg Blockhouse swoops down and grabs their target. Lois Lane doesn't hesitate to fight back, having been a hostage before, and even begins asking questions to her abductors, confirming why they took her and that they are part of Cerberus. Arriving at their dockside base, the cyborgs hint at their next plans but are too slow to close their roof, giving Lane time to scream for Superman's help. Even through the cheering citizens, Superman hears Lois call for him and speeds in the direction of his girlfriend's voice. Knowing that help is on the way, Lois Lane kicks Jolt, who doesn't take this well and orders Blockhouse to release the reporter. Using her energy-absorbing whip, Jolt brings Lois Lane to her knees. While her victim is paralyzed, Jolt slips on a device that begins draining the reporter's willpower. While they restrain Lois Lane and wait for the collar to take full control, the cyborgs realize Superman is almost on top of them. In aggravation, Jolt strikes Lane with her whip, revealing how their lead-lined base protects them from Superman's X-ray vision. Unfortunately, a lead-lined building stands out to somebody like Superman, who then sneaks in through the water under the pier and bursts into the room, surprising the cyborgs. Superman almost immediately becomes wrapped up in Jolt's whip and discovers that she and her weapon are laser vision proof. Superman then just resorts to snapping the whip with his brute strength before wrapping up Jolt with her own weapon. Blockhouse excitedly steps in and attacks the weakened Superman, knocking the hero several hundred yards through the snow. The muscle-bound cyborg follows to continue the fight, but quickly finds himself overwhelmed by the Man of Steel. After knocking out Blockhouse, Superman returns to the cyborg's base to check on the still restrained Lois Lane. Just as Cerberus had planned, Superman lets his guard down, allowing the secretly brainwashed Lois Lane to slip a collar around Superman's neck that begins sapping his will. Struggling against the effects of the will-sapping collar, Superman cannot stop himself from falling into the hole in the building's floor and sinks like a brick into the water. Superman catches a break when the salt water causes the collar to break and allows the hero to escape back to the surface. After Superman frees Lois from her bonds, the two attempt to question Blockhouse. The man hints at another secret of Cerberus before his mind is shut down like the other cyborgs before. From his secret base, Cerberus takes note of what he learned from the encounter. Realizing that his own cyborgs weren't doing the trick, Cerberus looks to outsource. At that moment, outside of Metropolis, Cadmus Labs is delivering the remains of the longtime Superman villain Metallo. The drivers are shocked when they hear metal scraping and discover one of Cerberus' cyborgs carrying away the villain. After Cerberus supplies Metallo with an upgraded body, the cyborg returns to Metropolis and attacks a random movie theater. After getting snagged by Metropolis' Special Crimes Unit, the robot's rampage is interrupted by the arrival of Superman. As Superman and Metallo begin hitting each other with their superpowered punches, Metallo starts speaking gibberish and having flashbacks of the day he woke up as a cyborg, as well as when Cerberus rebuilt him for this fight. When Superman hears Metallo saying he is working for Cerberus, he orders the Special Crimes Unit to grab the weapon they had been preparing for this moment. From their base, Cerberus watches the situation, while the voices of several different people agree that Metallo has failed and needs to be turned off. Before that can happen, Superman covers the cyborg in a special chemical that is intended to block Cerberus' kill signal. But even this goes to Cerberus' plans, as Metallo directs Superman to his final encounter. Readying themselves for the coming fight, the villain removes their head and puts a new one in its place. When Superman arrives at the coordinates Metallo had given him, he discovers a buried building covered in lead, and begins digging until he discovers the entrance. The hero is taken by surprise when a giant missile erupts from underneath him before shackles appear and lock the Man of Steel to the missile. Making matters worse, Superman can feel his strength being drained by the shackles on his limbs. Noticing an exposed fuel tank, a burst of laser vision causes the missile to explode and free Superman. On his view screen, Cerberus watches the fiery return of a very annoyed Man of Steel. Acknowledging that his current head wasn't up to the task of a physical fight, Cerberus replaces his head again with another who demands to be brought its armor. When Superman finally enters Cerberus' secret base, he is taken aback seeing the walls lined with heads floating in jars. Superman doesn't have long to examine the situation when Cerberus arrives decked out in his battle armor and knocks the hero across the room. Cerberus attacks using lengths of power-draining coils, but Superman recognizes this and dodges before firing his laser vision. Cerberus taunts the hero as his armor easily handles the attack. Changing strategies, Superman crushes the coil weapon before ripping it off and revealing a hand underneath. Cerberus simply thanks Superman before snatching up the Man of Steel and smashing him through a collection of heads, shattering many. When Superman begins getting the upper hand over Cerberus, the floating heads on the wall begin telepathically arguing to take over the body. After much struggle, Superman finally grabs a hold of Cerberus and manages to remove the head from his shoulders. Tossing the body away, Superman thinks that he has won, but Cerberus' body crawls out of the rubble and reveals a monstrous face where its chest should be. After placing a new head onto its shoulders, Cerberus retrieves the head of the body's previous controller and smashes it into Superman's face. Superman is horrified and reminds Cerberus that the heads are still alive, but only gets knocked into more heads as the monster questions if you could describe their existence as living. Ever the hero, Superman tries to rescue some of the fallen heads, but they are quickly blown apart in his hands as an armed Cerberus laughs about how ridiculous Superman is being. Angered by all the death he has seen, Superman advances on Cerberus, who describes how the voices of the other heads have driven him crazy. After flipping a switch on the console next to him, the entire room begins to shake, causing more heads to shatter. When Superman attempts to lift Cerberus, he takes a face full of toxic, choking gas. Cerberus reveals that the base is actually a rocket, and their target is Superman's favorite city, Metropolis. Superman, confused as to what Cerberus just dosed him with, weakly crawls to the nearest wall and rips it open to breathe the fresh air outside. Superman almost falls out, but holds on with all his remaining strength. This causes enough drag on the rocket to turn it 180 degrees and return it to where it had launched, where it safely explodes. As a battered Superman digs himself out of the rubble, he wonders what the hell he just fought, while some distance away, a surviving head of Cerberus glares menacingly. Close to a decade later, Cerberus would make his next and last appearance during the Joker's Last Laugh storyline that ran in the early 2000s. The monster would appear alongside many other obscure villains in a prison lunchroom scene, and then would be a part of the Jokerized army of villains who are rioting, but are brought down by the National Guard. That was in 2001, and Cerberus has not appeared again since. So why do I like Cerberus and think he's worth taking a look at? I think that Cerberus is unique in that he is a multi-level villain. It is simultaneously a high-tech army of cyborgs and killing machines, as well as a monster-faced freak of nature on top of being a plot from a sci-fi horror movie. Much like its mythological namesake, this Cerberus presented 3 different faces to the enemy, and even Superman wasn't prepared for what he was up against. Cerberus was a villain that would have made Michael Bay proud. All of its actions were loud, flashy, and intended to get people's attention. Whether it was openly firebombing Metropolis, writing threatening messages across the sky, or turning his own secret base into a rocket ship, Cerberus knew how to leave a memorable impression. One of my favorite aspects of Cerberus was its cleverness in fighting Superman. Most comic book readers know that when it comes to fighting the Man of Steel, you either get yourself a piece of kryptonite, have some spells or a magical weapon up your sleeve, or be beefy enough to punch the hero in his perfect jawline. Cerberus broke that mold by utilizing less common methods of fighting Superman. First was the use of power-draining technology that reduced Superman's strength, making him easier to handle. Next was utilizing Superman's need to breathe and creating a gas that successfully debilitating the unsuspecting Kryptonian. Finally, Cerberus used Lois Lane not only to lead Superman into a trap, a hallowed tradition in the Superman comics, but actually used her as part of the plan to lower Superman's defenses. I love to see a villain and writers who know how to think outside the box. And so many questions still remain about Cerberus after all these decades. What was Cerberus's beef with LexCorp about? Where did he get access to so many cyborgs? And what the hell is he? Where did he come from? Maybe the most important question, though, is what was the deal with all the heads in jars? Who were they, and how did they end up like that? There is so much room for an imaginative writer to fill in the blanks and flesh out the story of this crazy-looking monster person. I would love to see Cerberus return and fight heroes like Batman or Mr. Terrific, tech people with resources who could get to the bottom of the villain's origin. Ultimately, I believe Cerberus has a lot of potential that is still waiting to be tapped. It is a monster from parts unknown, controlled by a council of severed heads that order around homicidal cyborg soldiers. That is a hell of a mad lib to describe a villain, and the only villain it could ever describe is Cerberus. So here's hoping that a DC writer stumbles on this video and learns of this crazy villain that left even the Man of Steel wondering who he just messed with.